Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It, produced by foundersuite.com. Today I have Roger Dickey of Untitled Labs. How's it going, Roger?
Wonderful.
Great. Well, tell us, what is Untitled Labs? What are you doing?
Good question. We are experimenting with ideas. So we've raised about $3 million to run something like 5 to 10 prototypes with a team of 5 to 10 folks. And the concept is, when we find an idea that we think works really well based on some early metrics that we look at, then we'll take that, we'll shut off everything else. We'll focus the entire team on that one idea, and we'll go raise a Series A. So we call this a search lab, and it's you call it a new concept in startups, but it's similar to the concept of a search fund. It's a little bit like a studio model that you may have heard of. It's somewhere on the spectrum between your traditional proper startup and an investment fund or incubator. And I've written about this a little bit online, but basically boils down to doing some experimentation before picking that first idea.
And so do you start with 5 wholly separate ideas or 5 ideas within a particular vertical category and kind of have a bake-off between those? Or how does it, where are you coming up with these ideas?
It's probably closer to the latter. The idea is first to develop some theses about the world and say, hey, we think, personal finance is broken, or we think that there's a room for a new on-demand service in this sector. And within those like theses or themes, we say, okay, we think here are the ideas that are interesting. Here's one or two we'd like to prototype. We take those, we build them out. I like to take a bit of a hub and spoke process. So let's say we build out an on-demand app and grocery delivery, and we see that, okay, well, that app didn't work, but what people really want is meal kits. Then we'd end up starting like a Blue Apron instead of an Instacart. So sometimes you find a theme that you think is good, you're close to a global or local maxima, but you're not quite there. So you just kind of follow the gradient and you try a few ideas around that. I think in Gigster, we centered around about 4 different themes. And then one of them found us the idea for Gigster. It was personal finance and marketplaces. We looked at ideas at the intersection of those 2 trends. It's definitely based on these themes, but we leave ourselves latitude to experiment around those.
Interesting. And are you at the point yet where you're sharing what the 4 or 5 themes are yet, or are they still on stealth mode?
Mm-hmm. We're sharing 3 right now. One of them is kind of this idea that professional networking is ripe for some level of disruption. Everybody seems to hate LinkedIn, yet it's the gorilla in that space. It's a monopoly, and it's worth, according to Microsoft, $25 billion. So, that's one area we're thinking, is there, an early Facebook-esque wedge into LinkedIn? Facebook came into social networking and said, hey, we're not going to compete with MySpace. We're going to build a slightly different social product and launch it on college campuses. So we're thinking, hey, what's kind of the Facebook equivalent of getting in and taking over LinkedIn? Is there a product like that? We've got a couple ideas. Another whole theme is around on-demand services. So we're looking at, is there a way to compete with 1 or 2 of the services that Uber offers, but go after maybe a different niche or different market segment? We've got one idea there that I think is pretty strong. And then there's another idea that serves kind of that same market segment, which isn't an on-demand service, but it's something we would maybe go to if we try the on-demand thing and it doesn't work. And we're also looking at user-generated content. So sites like Medium.com, TripAdvisor, Pinterest, all these sites have this viral loop built around content. I think Andrew Chen at Andreessen Horowitz wrote about this on Twitter, but he calls it one of like the 2 major kind of possible viral loops, where people come to the site, they consume great content. That motivates them to produce content. And then when they produce content, they get social validation off that content. And that social validation wants them to come and spend more time on the website. So you see this, you see this virtuous cycle, which, increases engagement over time. And there's a natural network effect because the more people producing content, the more valuable the site is. So we like user-generated content. I have some experience on that before through social gaming. So we've got one idea that's in kind of long-form user-generated content like Medium.
Interesting. As a tangent, Medium's interesting because I feel like we're getting sucked into its vortex lately. Like we're publishing more stuff on there. Now we're guest publishing on other Medium blogs like The Startup and stuff. And for whatever, for better or for worse, in the last month or two, I'm finding myself spending more and more time both consuming and producing for Medium. So I guess to your thesis there, it makes sense. How does this work in a practical basis? I mean, like even starting one startup is all consuming and, incredibly hard. So how are you practically building like 3 things? Do you divide up engineering? Do they spend a certain amount of time on each one? And, how do you kind of put it out there in the world and market it?
Well, I'm thankfully having done this 3 times in a row. I have, some experience on the, the right and the wrong ways to do it. We have what I would call a modified version of Agile that we use, which is designed for very small teams that essentially eliminates as much red tape as possible. So we're not going and logging tasks in Jira and Trello. We're not building massive test suites for the applications. As much as possible, we're having individuals or maybe small teams of 1 or 2 work on each project. So we're looking actually to hire an early team, as I said, of 5 to 10 people, mostly full stack engineers, and then probably one or two designer product people. I think with a team like that, that's highly entrepreneurial, highly agile, we're able to move fast and release prototypes in as little as 1 or 2 weeks. So it gives us the ability to get a lot more shots on goal, try a lot more things out. We do have to make sure that we're building true MVPs, so they have to be viable. That's important. But we've found a certain engineering process that allows us to get these out quickly. We'll work on at most 2 in parallel, but we'll probably be mostly focused on one at any given time as a team.
Interesting. Do these small teams working on these different projects, are they sort of competing against each other? I'm almost thinking of how Amazon, at least the rumor is they'll have like competing teams working on the same sort of thing.
Battling business units.
Yeah, battling business units. Is it kind of like that or not so much?
We actually did that at Liquid Labs, which was the search lab precursor to Gigster. We had a team of 6, so we split it down the middle, 3 and 3. Each team had at least 1 engineer, at least 1 product or design person. And we had something like Y Combinator internally, where every 2 weeks, each team would go full cycle. They would come up with an idea, get it in front of customers, build it, launch it, get feedback, and they put together a slide deck and they pitch the slide deck to everybody else in the company. So every Friday we were doing essentially a demo day with 2 mini startups every other Friday. And that ended up being a good approach. It was competitive, but also cooperative. That was the same culture at Zynga where I was. Zynga was a collection of these general managers that ran different gaming titles. So if you're the GM on Mafia Wars, and the GM on Farmville comes up with some great feature that grows their revenue by 10%, you're going to want to learn what that is and apply it to your game. So at the same time, so that, each kind of general manager wanted to be the first one to discover something new, but then also they wanted to help other teams and roll that out across the company. So, we all have equity as founding team members that motivates us to work together, but then there is this natural competitive aspect where everybody kind of wants their idea to win.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you pick a winner? Is it all metrics based? Are you, tracking metrics really detailed and you're kind of figuring out the one that has the most traction, growth, and going with that? Or is there some other science or art to it?
We have certain metrics we look at. So, obviously for each type of idea, it's going to be different. For a SaaS product, you look at You look at MRR, you look at conversion from free trials, you look at churn. For a game, or let's say a social product, you're going to look at K factor, virality, engagement. I think in general, across any business idea, you're looking at, I would say, 4 things: engagement, retention, monetization, and growth. And I would argue you want to validate them in that order. So engagement is frequency. How frequently do people use the product? And then, if they're not using it that frequently, if you have something like, if you're building like a product for marriages or something, well, people have 1.6 marriages in their life statistically, so they're going to use your product 1.6 times. So, those businesses don't tend to be valuable. Those are hard to build. It's this user acquisition slog. So we're looking to find something that's much higher frequency than that. Uber, people use 3 or 4 times a day. That's a beautiful service. Retention, maybe somebody will use your product obsessively for a few weeks and then quit. And that's not a real business either. One example is this app called TBH. It's sold to Facebook for $30 million. They would engage users passionately for 6 weeks, and then people would pretty much quit. So that put a ceiling on the value that company had. Monetization is important. So it's a good thing to validate in parallel with engagement and retention, because if you slap on monetization later, it can invalidate some of your early metrics. And then growth is important, but as many great product thinkers have said, you don't want to be growing inorganically too early, because it can give you a false signal. So you want to kind of let your product grow naturally through word of mouth, see how that goes, and then layer in growth later.
Yeah. Do you have a timeline for when you pick the winner? Because I would imagine some of these businesses have different, natural evolution or timelines. So how do you put a cap on it?
We don't have that as a concept yet. But, I would say where we set kind of a hard cap or limit is how long we ideate. You have to be in the business of moving forward. Momentum is important in startups. So we don't ever want to get stuck in rat hole on ideation for too long. I would say every 2 to 3 months we'll start a new idea. We want to leave us enough time. We want to leave ourselves enough time to think deeply about ideas and not start writing code, but also not take too long on that. So it's a delicate balance, I would say. On idea validation, that's really a gut thing that comes with experience. How long something's been out to give you a statistically significant result. In the case of Zynga, we would know within a couple days of launching a game if it would succeed or not. And I think in one case, we shut down a game we spent 1 year building 2 days after launch, which
Really?
Sounds extreme, but when you have the level of data that company had, you can do things like that.
Very interesting. Cool stuff. I'll be curious to watch this. How many total ideas would you cycle through in a year? You got 3 or 4 or 5 right now. What's the kind of quantity?
We have something like 40 or 50 on the list, where an idea is a bullet point that's 5 or 10 words. So we're talking very high level abstract. I wouldn't say very high level, but fairly high level abstract concepts. And these ideas come from everywhere. Come from ideation I've done, reading that me and other people in the team have done. They come from our friends, from various investors that I met with who said, hey, I'm an investor. If I could start any company, it would be this one. Here's this idea I've had on my idea shelf, so to speak. So we gather ideas from everywhere, add them to this list. The list gets ranked. We pull ideas off the top and we build those in sequence of highest confidence first. So we have, I would say in a given year, if you say 2 to 3 months per idea, you're talking 4 to 6 ideas a year. We can maybe get faster than that if we parallelize. So if we split into 2 teams, then we will do double that, so 8 to 12. We'll see how things evolve. The team right now is pretty small, but we're just starting to add our early numbers. So, once we get going, we'll see what we can handle.
Are there, I've heard some similar entities like this, mainly in the gaming space, now that I think about it. I mean, is there a precedent for this sort of what'd you call it, search lab that has been successful. It's a really cool idea. It sounds really fun. But like, is this sort of a new model, or are you patterning this off some other search labs that we might have heard of?
I've actually never seen this model formally talked about or defined. It's, you know, it's similar to what a lot of founders will do when they're experimenting on ideas. It's basically that, but funded with a team whose purpose is to experiment. And I wrote a little about this on my blog on Medium. You know, there are a couple major differences it has from, you know, the concept of a studio, or, you know, so like Atomic, Garrett Camp's studio is called Expa. There's one in LA called Science. There are a number of these studios. And, you know, that's kind of its own thing. Studios spin off companies with their own CEOs and their own cap tables. We don't do that. We're just one company with one CEO and one cap table. You know, so I think really it's funded experimentation, put simply. You know, so you could ask the question, oh, well, you know, why raise money to experiment? A lot of people experiment without raising money. The thing is, if you do that, it's hard to reach viability on ideas that you test. And if you're building MVPs, well, they have to be viable, because if they're not, you haven't really proven anything. And to test 5 ideas to viability, I mean, you need to write code, launch prototypes, do design work. You might need to do some marketing. You know, this requires budget and funding. I'm a big believer in raising money to support an experimentation phase that produces products that have sufficient viability. You know, and I wrote about that. And the reason I did was because people kept asking me what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, what's your vision? I'm like, well, we don't have one. We're trying ideas. They're like, oh, so you don't know what you're doing? It's like, yeah, we don't. You know, but this is still, you know, I think a coherent concept. I mean, you look at a lot of the top consumer businesses. Slack was a side project of a gaming company. Facebook was this weekend project Zuckerberg did for fun. It was like a hot or not type thing. Twitter came out of this lab called Odeo. It was just something that Jack came up with for fun. So, you know, probably 10 or 20 of the top consumer companies that we use, multi-billion-dollar products, were born from experimentation, sort of accidentally. We are intentionally experimenting.
Yeah, intentionally. Was that part of your pitch? So let's talk about fundraising. Was that part of the pitch, this intentional experimentation? And, you know, maybe tell me a little bit about the process of raising money for this. You've raised money for how many companies in the past? 2 or 3?
Just one in the past. This is the second company I've ever raised money for.
Okay, gotcha.
It's the third company I've worked on. The first one I bootstrapped.
And then Gigster was the one you raised money for, right?
Gigster was my first time raising money. That's correct.
So, and refresh my memory, Gigster is still a privately held company, or was it acquired?
Not acquired, still privately held. So I left in June last year, and we hired a CEO. And I announced that. I did a little write-up on that on the blog as well. We have a fantastic guy on board who he's sold a company. He's taken a company public. He led the Pivotal Labs spin out. You know, he was involved with DMC Software. Incredibly sharp guy who really loves what we're doing and has a lot of passion for the enterprise element of it. You know, I decided last year that I'm not as much of an enterprise person, and you know, we needed a different leader to take the company to its next chapter. So his name's Chris, and he's on board. But you know, the company's doing great. Still privately held. We've raised a Series B, and you know, it's just growing and plugging away. You know, we're hiring executives right now. I think that's the major focus.
Yeah, awesome, cool. So talk about raising money for Untitled Labs. The list here is kind of a who's who. We've got Founders Fund, Felicis, Joe Montana. I'd love to hear what that was like pitching Joe Montana.
That was cool.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. Really nice. Takes time for his companies. So yeah, I mean, the process was, you know, to be honest, it was a little stressful because I didn't really know how to position it because I'd never raised money for something like this. I mean, I said I did a search lab before Gigster, which we raised money for, but we pitched an actual idea. We pitched this idea called Get Experts, which was, and it's hilarious. Like we had this like janky web application that hardly worked. I remember we went in to pitch Sequoia and they graciously laughed us out of the room. You know, they're an amazing firm. You know, you're an amazing firm when like you say no to people and they come away with having a 5-star experience.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you know, we pitched a lot of people, and anyways, we managed to scrape together some capital for that. This time I went in telling people I know I'm experimenting. There's no first idea. We don't have anything built. There's no team. It's just me, and I'm going to build a team and we're going to go and experiment. So, you know, I think the first pitch meeting, I kind of had this changing strategy. I started off by saying, you know, hey, here's a big list of ideas. And I think I just read down the list. And that was a little confusing of an experience for investors. And I think the one or two people that too passed. You know, it's just reading off a big unstructured list. You know, they don't really know what to do with that. The second firm I pitched, I said, okay, I'm going to plant a flag and say, we're doing one of these, you know, we're doing this one first. And maybe there's some others. I think the problem with that was we were neither here nor there. We weren't experimentation, but we didn't have a real company or product. So that was kind of a fail. And then the third firm, I think I got it right, where I narrowed it down to 3 themes. And I said, look, I'm not going to pitch you on a whole idea list. There's 3 things I believe about the world, and I want to go study these. And within each of these themes, here's a specific idea. So I did pitch one idea per theme, but I spent more time talking about the themes, the team I was going to build, and my background. That pitch ended up working, and you know, we saw a better success rate with that. I didn't really talk to that many people. We had a lot of quick yeses from early Gigster investors who wanted to partner with me again, which is great. We brought on a few investors that were new. Joe Montana was new. We didn't work with him before. And Founders Fund was new. But there's a partner of Founders Fund I really love and I wanted to work with, Cyan Bannister. So I'm getting the chance to do that, which is great. And actually Founders Fund just added Keith Rabois, which is incredibly exciting news.
Oh, right. Yeah. Cool. What, who led the room?
All around, glad.
Sorry,
Founders Fund led the round.
Founders Fund led the round. Cool. What about Ashton Kutcher? Did you pitch Ashton, or does he have gatekeepers in front of him taking the pitches and making decisions?
He has gatekeepers. I worked with the gatekeepers on his team. Great folks. But Ashton invested in Gigster and was very helpful personally there. You know, we had a couple like fairly long phone calls where he, you know, gave advice. He even came into the office and did a fireside chat with me and to the team. So I got to meet him. You know, people really enjoyed that. So yeah, he's really helpful. I'd highly recommend taking money from Sound Ventures. He's a pretty sharp consumer guy. So I pitched him pretty hard on getting involved in Untitled.
Yeah. What was, and going back to this, what was the pitch to Joe Montana like? What does he ask? Is he a numbers guy? Is he a, you know, show me product guy? Is he a delving into your team guy? I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear what it's really like to pitch him.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to pitch Joe directly. When I came into the office, the first thing they did was they introduced me to Joe. So I shook his hand. He said, hey, good to see you here. You know, we're excited to learn more. I think he was in some other meeting with one of their portfolio companies, actually. So he might sit on the board. So he was helping. He was on the phone. It sounded like doing something important. And then I went into a separate room with his general partners and pitched them. That pitch didn't go so well, actually. So I was surprised they wanted to invest afterwards. You know, I think I kind of went through the themes and they're like, all right, meeting kind of ended early, which never feels good. And they're like, great, we'll get back to you. No further questions.
But it worked out. I mean, what do you think when Founders Fund came in, you know, they tipped them back in your direction or who knows?
I'm not sure. I don't remember if I told them that or not. They might have committed before they said that. So after they committed, I sent them a note asking them a question. and they didn't reply for 10 days. So I was actually going to kick them out of the round and make room for somebody else. Near the end, the deal heated up a lot. I would say like early January. We went from like not having really much interest or deal heat to a tremendous amount. And then I wanted to take 2.5, and I think we had 5 or 6 worth of interest. So I went back and started asking some people if they could lower their commitments so we could get more people in the round. And a lot of people wanted to hold firm and keep their share, but some people were okay being flexible. So we were able to get in a few more people. And then in the end, I did hear back from Joe Montana's fund, and they ended up still joining the round.
What, any lessons or observations, having raised money for Gigster and kind of your second time around raising money, anything you did differently, or was it a lot easier because you had kind of a track record? Or did you do anything differently the second time? I don't know. I know it's kind of a broad question, but maybe contrast and compare raising money first versus second.
Yeah, good question. It definitely was different. So we raised it as a price round, which I wouldn't recommend. It was more expensive and took more time than if we just.
Gigster, or are you talking
Untitled?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we did Untitled as a price round, which I wouldn't recommend. Let's see. I felt comfortable reaching out directly to investors. I think with Gigster, I kind of waited for some people to come to me. But with Untitled, I kind of just emailed people directly, some of whom I already knew, and just said, "Hey, I'm starting something new. Do you want to talk?" And everybody said, "Yes. Let's meet next week," kind of thing. I tried to do most of the meetings in the same time period. So I emailed a bunch of people one week, and I said, "Hey, can you meet next week? I want to get all these meetings done next week." I tried to do the whole kind of round in a 1 or 2 week period. And I think that was good. That focused it, created some time pressure for folks to make decisions sooner. Let's see. In terms of valuation, we ended up, I don't think we needed to have a lead. I think I could have just led it myself and said, "Hey, here's the price." But we worked with Founders Fund on that and found a price that made sense. So there's been an awkward process around, I got a lot of people to say yes, and then I set the price after that. And then I had to go back to people that said yes and say, "Oh, by the way, here's the price." Some people, thought they might want to get out, but most people stayed in anyways. So, there were some questions around that. But I think it would have been better for us to just set the price earlier, use convertible note type document. And I think that would have alleviated a little bit of stress. Other than that, I mean, it's really hard for me to provide much advice that would be valuable because, I think I'm also in a fortunate position given the track record I have.
Sure. What did it enter your mind that you need, some pretty deep pocketed founder or investors on board, like Founders Fund? Because I'm assuming if some of these projects work, you're going to need to raise lots of money for it. Is that a true statement?
Well, I've heard before that people try to bring on a set of seed investors that can finance them going forward. I've never found that to be necessary. There's such a healthy Series A, Series B ecosystem that, there's not really any signaling risk if you go get an entirely new set of investors for the Series A. For Gigster, we had people follow on, but most of our seed investors weren't capable of really doing an A round or B round. So we didn't think of going back to people. Let's see. So with Untitled, it wasn't so much about deep pockets. I mean, I wanted to keep the set of seed investors smaller. We had something like 20 different angels or 25 angels come in to Gigster's seed round. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a smaller group of people who had more skin in the game for Untitled. So we have maybe only 8 investors, something like that with Untitled. And I wanted even less than that. So we needed people who could write $500,000 checks. We weren't bringing in people writing like 20K checks. So needed deep pockets in that sense, but not people who could then lead an A.
Why'd you want a smaller group? Was it a pain to handle so many investors from Gigster? Was that Was there overhead in dealing with a lot of investors?
Not really. I mean, maybe because I was careful up front who I let on, or maybe because I don't know, maybe I was fortunate. But no, it wasn't about overhead. It's more about how much an investor really cares about the investment. If everybody's written a 50K check, nobody really cares if you fail, and they're not going to help you. And the reality of raising a round is you're selling, 15, 20, 30% of your company to investors. And that's a part of your cap table you can never get back. So, these investors, essentially each investor has the amount of equity that you give an executive.
Sure.
So you want to get them to help as much as you possibly can. This time around, I wanted to bring on people who felt motivated to actually be helpful.
Yeah, good. All right, one or two more questions about fundraising, and then we'll talk about some of your hiring plans. You've done a lot of angel investments. I was looking at your page, rocket.st. I don't know, any lessons learned from being on that side of the table, or just tips for fundraising for, first-time founders? Is there any common patterns of these companies that have raised money from you that you've seen people do when fundraising? Any lessons from that?
Yeah, so much to say. I mean, that could be a whole 1 hour phone call or
Sure.
meeting. I actually just got off the phone with a founder who was pitching me a new idea. There are a few patterns. I think we hear the adage, ideas are a dime a dozen. I think the idea is very important, and that's actually where most people fail, is they have an idea that even on paper, it's not a technology business, where technology is part of it. Like you'll have a web page, but the most challenging part is, buying up real estate or something in logistics or whatever it is. You look at a business like Postmates, and it's questionable if that's really a technology business. They just have a bunch of drivers doing delivery.
Yeah.
There's some businesses where they really never should have raised money from technology VCs for different reasons. They're not scalable. They're not defensible. They don't have a technology advantage. Keith Rabois, Founders Fund, has a great list. He tweeted after he joined recently. That's a good thing, I think, for founders to check out. Just get a sense of what investors look for. He calls it his investment criteria, and
Okay.
it's the things he looks for in investment. One thing, for example, is, does this company have an accumulating advantage? So in the case of, Facebook or LinkedIn, well, every new member that joins makes it a better experience for the other members. So you have network effects, which the investors love. Businesses like that grow very quickly to billions of dollars in value. Businesses that don't have an accumulating advantage, where it's linear slog to get one new customer and then, a couple new customers every year, it's way less compelling, right? So I think a lot of people start businesses that fundamentally fail on one of these basic axes. And their time would be better spent just getting a job somewhere, or, sitting and thinking for another 6 months before they start a company. So I think a lot of people fail on idea. I would say team is another. I think a lot of people start companies maybe before they should. My first company I started kind of by accident and then sold it to Zynga. I stayed at Zynga for 3.5 years, and I think I learned a lot. So when I came out and I started a new company, that was after working at this company. It was 30 employees when I joined, 3,000 when I left and went IPO. So I learned a lot in that journey, which I think I was ready to be a founder for my next step. So when I started Gigster, I was really ready. For some people, I say, hey, I'd recommend you just get a job at a startup, and then maybe in 3 years you'll be ready. So I think that's an issue, and it's okay to start a company before you're ready. It just means, you might have some dead space on your resume, and, you may have been better served, learning rather than kind of just building something. I would say on the team side and the idea side, you see a lot of issues. After that, if you really have those pieces in line, I think as companies get later stage, the issue I see, and something I wish I did better at Gigster, is people hire executives too late. So companies can end up scaling too slowly. a lot of founders just don't start scaling themselves as early as they should. And that was one of my biggest lessons from Gigster is I really wish we focused on hiring some great executives earlier. So that's something that, the lesson I'll take with me to Untitled, and I actively pass along to my portfolio companies as well.
Cool. Good. All right. Last question. Any kind of a different thing. Are you still doing angel investing? If any audience members are interested, do you look for any type of deals or any thesis other than, what you're already doing?
I do. I'm less active these days than I used to be. So I'm actually raising a fund so that I can make investments. I can be a little more active than I used to be. Once I get that fund put together, then I think that'll be kind of a little better. But I am still writing some checks now. I'm interested really in anything that matches my background and experience. So someone's work on marketplaces, future of work. And not gaming, actually. I don't really make a lot of investments there, but consumer products, definitely interested in consumer. Pretty broad base across consumer. Checking out my angel list kind of gives a better idea of my interest in some companies I've backed. So I'd encourage folks to do that. Still active for now.
Cool. Okay, so let's go back. What are you looking for? You're hiring full stack engineers. What would you like to plug? Let's put it like that.
So, we've just gotten started Untitled, and we're looking to, as I said, build a small team of incredible folks who are full stack, entrepreneurial. We're talking, people who have deep engineering background, typically classically trained folks who love side projects, but also have a passion for the product side. They don't just want to build a spec. They have their own ideas and opinions about the product. So, if anybody like that is listening and, maybe you've been thinking about starting a company, but you might want to take a year or two off from that and work at a great startup first, I would put forward Untitled Labs as an option. It's a great community and team of really sharp entrepreneurial full stack people who have a lot of experience building. Generally just a great group to be around where you'll learn a lot and see a company go from the earliest idea stages through Series A, Series B, and some growth beyond.
Are all the positions in San Francisco? Are you doing remote? What's the criteria?
Currently all in San Francisco. We may move the company at some point, but really looking for folks that are able to relocate here that are currently based here.
And purely engineering? Are you looking for marketing people as well, or growth hackers, or what?
Just engineering right now. I'm on engineering and product myself. I think everybody in the team will double on a couple different roles. So, I think we'll naturally see some folks who have an engineering background who maybe have some interest in marketing or product operations or product design. So definitely people who have kind of a broad base of interest, I think are best. But right now, the hard requirement is that people have deep and recent engineering background and they're willing to spend most of their time writing code.
Yeah, cool. If someone meets these criteria, how do they get in touch with you, or do you have a job page somewhere? Where should they go?
Right now, we've got, I would say, visit untitled-labs.com. And I think my email address is linked there. I would ask folks reaching out there, it's meant for jobs, not for pitching or, for angel investments or anything like that. Again, I'm not as active there, but, definitely would like to meet anybody who meets that criteria on the hiring side.
Cool. What's your target? How many hires will you do in 2019?
Between 5 and 10. No higher than that. I think a small team is an effective team. And before we really know what we're doing, we don't want to, leverage up too high on staff. It'll just increase our burn rate and really give us less legroom to experiment. So probably going to keep it small. Could land around 6, could land around 8. I don't know the exact number. We'll see what balance of skills we get. We have somebody right now who's kind of primary on back end, who's thinking about joining soon. Somebody who's really strong on front end who's joining soon. We have someone on design. So, that group of 3 could essentially be a pod that works on ideas, and maybe looking to bring on one other pod like that and potentially one other person.
Very cool. If someone joins and they're working on a project that is not the winning project, do they get folded onto the winning project, or how does that, how will that work?
Yeah, I mean,
they're gone.
No, we're all on the same team end of the day. Whereas we may be working on different ideas, once we find one that's good, we'll all jump on that one and commit. Obviously, if someone on the team doesn't love the final idea we end up with, they're welcome to leave. But that we didn't have that problem at Liquid Labs. Once we found a winning idea, everybody jumped on that. We were 15 months in ideation, so we were ready to be done and just work on one thing.
Very cool. All right, Roger, I've taken enough of your time. This is really cool. It sounds like if I didn't run my own startup, I would, this sounds like a fun project or team to join. So it sounds really cool. I encourage folks to check it out. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be watching and seeing what emerges out of the labs, and best of luck to you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right.